Welcome back to the channel. I don't usually do preview videos for games, but this week's a bit different for a number of reasons. First off, I think this is kind of like the sliding doors weekend of the Six Nations Championship. What do I mean by that? Well, Ireland are obviously heavy front runners. They're playing Wales this weekend. France playing Italy. We're all kind of waiting for 2 weeks from now or the next round in the championship to see if this championship blows wide open with a France victory over Ireland. However, to set the table for that, we need to know who's at least going to be in the conversation of being competitive with Ireland towards the end of the championship should France have that win. Hence, England-Scotland is kind of that decider. France will obviously be in the conversation. They've had one loss against England. But if France beat Ireland next weekend, it means that one of either England and Scotland, Ireland and France can all win the competition. So, huge game. A bit of an addendum to that. Of course, we can't forget about Italy as well. Italy last year almost beat France, took them right to the pit, had a penalty at the last minute, and they probably should have been allowed to retake it because the ball left the tee, So Italy, maybe they beat France this weekend, and they are then very much in the competition as well. I don't want to forget about them. They're a good team. It's also a big game for these individual teams. I think both these teams are at a bit of a checkpoint in terms of the conversation about where they're going and where they've come from. Starting with, obviously, England, my team. I will talk about Scotland, but England themselves had a lot of bad juju about them the last few weeks, or months even, in the fact that they just could not win a game. Last 20 minutes of every single game, everything fell apart. They were competitive against the best teams in the world in South Africa and New Zealand. And they also had what probably a lot of people thought was a surprise loss against Australia as well, losing at the last pip at Twickenham as well. The Steve Borthwick era has been a mixture, a mixed bag. Started off, I think, not so great. Actually, his first match was against Scotland at Twickenham. I remember, I was there. And that was a loss. That's how he started off. He then managed to cobble together a team that managed to be competitive in a World Cup. I think he did a great job of designing a team based on the players that he had and the experiences that he had, rather than trying to develop a team for the future, if that makes sense. He created a team that could compete at that World Cup. Since then, he's now changed the team, had a huge amount of turnover in terms of the players, to actually build for the future. A lot of players have been brought in. This is a really young side. And, there's been criticisms of the fact that Borthwick hasn't been able to win a game, but at least England have actually been playing a more expansive style of rugby, a more exciting style of rugby from the dull dundrums of the end of the Eddie Jones era. So, that's the mixed bag. Playing better, not winning games. And this has obviously come to a head from last weekend, where they finally beat a team that is deemed probably one of the best in the world. Yes, France weren't playing their best. But the important thing is that England won. And the even more important thing is that they won in the final 20 minutes, which is what they've not been doing for the last 7-8 games. Can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but that's roughly where we're at. 7-8 games in a row of just constantly losing it, and losing it in the final 20 minutes of the game. Very frustrating stuff. So this is big, I think if you're looking across the pitch from them, Scotland have beaten them like 5 times out of 5 in the last few times these two teams have met. But I think, when you're looking at world rankings and you're thinking about the top teams in the world, the top teams, I think, are France, Ireland, New Zealand, and South Africa. And I think underneath that, there's probably a tier of teams of like England, Scotland, and Australia, right? I think that's fair to say. So this is a big moment. You've just won against one of the best teams in the world last weekend with a lot of bold calls in terms of selection, such as Finn Smith starting at fly half. Now you've got to back it up with a performance that, you've got to define yourself as being better than what you were before. And I think a loss against Scotland could completely ruin all the positive energy that has been built from beating France last weekend. I really think it's that important. I really think this is a critical moment. I think if England win, this propels them to be seen differently on not only the world stage, but internally as well. I think this is maybe what builds Borthwick up to be one of the best coaches in the world, if he can go from winning this game and winning further games. If they lose, I think it's back to the same old story of, is Borthwick the right guy? I think that's how critical this game is for England. Comment below if you agree or not. Now looking at Scotland, on the other side of things. Scotland, as I said, regularly beat England, have done for many, many times in a row, but this is the golden generation of players that Scotland have. You know, we have the England team selection out already, which gives us a lot of interesting thoughts about the selections, but we don't have the Scottish team. But that's okay, because I think we know what Scotland's team's going to be. It usually is the same 15 every single week. It's not a criticism of Scotland in terms of not having the player depth, although that's certainly an argument in some cases when they play some of the better teams in the world, because I think their team can actually manipulate how they play and change how they play. They have players that can do a lot of different things and they can win in different ways. However, looking at Scotland and their history, yes, they've beaten England a lot of times, but maybe there's some sort of conversation starting to happen around, have they really taken full advantage of this golden generation players that they've had? You think about some of the players in this team. You think about Finn Russell, Tuipulotu, who's obviously injured at the moment, so that goes to one side. Van der Merwe, Hugh Jones, you know, in the pack. Xander Fagerson has been talked up a lot. Rory Darge is playing amazingly. He's obviously a bit more newer in terms of his experience in the team. He's kind of like in the last few years. My point really is that like they've had this golden generation of players, and yet they've not won anything. You know, not a single Six Nations. Every World Cup they seem to flounder. Yes, 2023. You could argue they were in the group of death, but I would put the argument back to you saying, even against Ireland and South Africa, it seemed like they didn't even really turn up for the game. They didn't feel competitive. They didn't feel like they had some clever way to try and win the game. They never seemed like they were in the fight for those games. Just my personal opinion. Let me know what you think. But I think there definitely is an argument of, if Scotland aren't competing at this Six Nations, if they lose to England this weekend, have they ruined this golden generation of players? You know, a lot of these guys now are in their early 30s, kind of moving on in terms of their career. Van der Merwe is obviously still amazing. Finn Russell, still amazing. But, you know, there's going to come a time when these two players, and many others in there as well, are going to become too old to be as competitive as they were before. You know, and this could be the Six Nations where they probably have the best chance to compete. Think about it. A win against England, they're only one loss down. France beats Ireland. And then we look at the other fixtures that Scotland have to go about. They have to play Wales at Murrayfield, a very winnable game. And then they get to play in the last weekend France at the Stade de France, which is obviously a big challenge. But if you're going into that game knowing that you have a chance to win the whole thing, everything's on the table, then, you know, why not go for it? I think there is definitely an argument in there. And I do think if Scotland lose this weekend, towards the end of the Six Nations Championship, people could be talking about Gregor Townsend no longer being the head coach of Scotland. It might seem a bit dramatic, but I think you need to look at this in the context of what the other options are at the moment. Franco Smith has decided that he's puts his hat in the ring in terms of being able to be a head coach or a director of rugby for an international side. He said that only last weekend. You know, and he's taken Glasgow from strength to strength to winning the URC last year and possibly maybe winning the European Championship this year. I'm saying that because I feel like there's better teams out there, but the way that Glasgow are playing this year is sensational, so I wouldn't put it past them. So this might be the opportunity to move on from Gregor Townsend, and if they have another competition where they lose once again against England, and then they end the competition with losing to France, then, you know, I think there's maybe some rumourings and conversations about, is Gregor Townsend the guy to take us forward? It's just my opinion. Let me know what you think down below. So we've talked about the stories of these two teams coming into this game and why it's so large. On top of it, let's have a look at the selections of the teams, right? So England, they have gone for the same selection other than one change to their first 15 that they played against France. I think this is obviously a very big call. Finn Smith said he was like a deer in the headlights in that game, but really pulled it together for the last 20 minutes. Marcus Smith is again back in that 15 shirt. And the the only change is Ollie Chessum is now in the second row for George Martin. I personally was calling for Ollie Chessum to be in that starting 15 last weekend against France, and Martin subbed out. I just feel like Chessum offers you more mobility around the park, but I think he was such an impact player in terms of coming off the bench that he really put his name down and said, I should be in this starting 15. And honestly, if he keeps playing the way that I know he can play and how good he is, he has a shot to make it into the Lions squad as well. Not just because of how good he is at second row, there's lots of great second rows. Maro, Itoje, Joe McCarthy, you know, James Ryan. There's loads of Ty Burn, loads of good second rows. But it's more the fact that he has the ability to play blindside flanker as well. That if he plays well and he has that flexibility in his game for where he can play, he has a shot to be in there. Great line-out option as well. Looking at the backs, so completely unchanged. You know, there's a lot of controversy of should Marcus Smith be playing 15? It's not his natural position. He plays fly half more. Now we're getting some kind of silly articles now. Should Marcus Smith be training to be a scrum half so that he can be a utility back? I don't buy into all of that, and I think if I'm Borthwick, I think I know what I'm doing here. I think Freddie Stuart has unfortunately showed that he's too slow to play the position. At the international level, he's been stepped on when he should be making try-saving tackles on multiple occasions, and I feel bad saying it. I love him as a player. I'm a Leicester fan, so I love watching Freddie Stuart. I think he's great. But I think the reason that Marcus Smith is back there is just because he wouldn't be caught out like that, right? He obviously offers a lot more in counter-attack ability as well, and I think he probably has a better boot than Freddie Stuart. You know, the problem is that there's no other kind of fullback to fall into that position and kind of take the team forward. So there is arguments that maybe Joe Carpenter could come in there, but then you're adding even more inexperience to a team that's very inexperienced as it is. Joe Carpenter has been playing excellently for Sale, but if you're putting someone in with 0 caps in a team that already has limited caps, it could just be a bit of a disaster and a lack of leadership, which I think Marcus Smith has in abundance. I think he's a leader of this team. Sleightholme and Freeman on the wing make up like a Northampton spine within this team as well, and I think that really will help Finn Smith in terms of being able to distribute the ball out to the playmakers in the team. Looking at Scotland's selection, and at the recording of this video, we don't know what Scotland's selection is currently. I think it's looking like good news for Finn Russell to be back after that collision with Darcy Graham. I think Darcy Graham's probably the one that's a bit more of a maybe in terms of being part of the squad. And we look at the forwards, I think it's just your usual group, you know, we're not going to be making any changes here. So Dave Cherry, I think, has been really good at hooker for Scotland, an underrated player and a good player in fantasy rugby. He's cheap and he scores quite a few points, so if you're looking for that, get him in. But then Zander Fagerson is also a selection choice, and for me, I think Zander Fagerson was probably the odds-on starting tight head prop for the British and Irish Lions with Tide Furlong's injury that's been keeping him out the last few months. I do think Zander hasn't been playing that well in the first 2 games for Scotland so far. So this is a big game for him, especially going against a English team that is probably got a huge amount of pride around the scrum. So big game for Zander Fagerson this weekend, absolutely. The second rows, Jonny Gray and Grant Gilchrist, stalwarts, not too much to say about them. I don't think they'll be making the British and Irish Lions. I think there's just too many other good second rows choices. And then they have this new back row of Rory, Darge, Fagerson, and also Jack Dempsey. And I love this back row, mainly because there's a lot of commonalities in terms of the skill sets. They're all quick, they're all powerful runners with the ball, and they can cause a bit of a nightmare for you in both attack and defence. I like all 3 of these. I think they give me a lot of reminiscent nostalgia for, remember the 3 Bs back in the day, which was John Barkley, can't remember BT's first name, and then it was Kelly Brown as well. A really good back row selection and talent that they have available. And, you know, look out for these guys to be in the British Irish Lions as well. Okay, another addendum. Looking at the team that's now been released, Jamie Ritchie is in instead of Fagerson. I feel like this offers Scotland more line-out choices and probably a bit better in defensive duties, with taking some away of that ball-carrying ability that Matt Fagerson has. So, interesting selection. I wouldn't have gone for it, but I feel like that's probably what Scotland are thinking. Get the tight game down, get the defensive set to keep England stifled. So, keep a look out for that. Okay, so looking at the backs, I think the main notes really is what we've talked about already. So Finn Russell, will he play at fly half? I think it's probably more than likely yes. The other option is Tom Jordan. And if Tom Jordan is going to be playing at fly half instead of Finn Russell, I think it will be a different story for when it was against Ireland. I think if that is the case, they would have prepared Tom Jordan for the last 2 weeks to be playing at fly half, which means that he would have come in a lot more prepared to play that fly half position rather than playing just inside centre. So I think they'll have a lot more time to prepare for that eventuality if it is the case. So if it does happen with Finn Russell coming out of the team, I don't think that's necessarily the end of the world. Tom Jordan, I think, has played very, very well for his time in the URC. But yeah, he'll be more prepared this time round. The centres. So, obviously Tom Jordan, as I've been talking about, but Hugh Jones is playing 13, and this guy can be a nightmare for defences. Honestly, he's my selection for British Irish Lions 15 in terms of that outside centre spot. And, you know, I think the gaps in the defence that England can have can usually be found on the outside with their blitz defence. So if Scotland can manage to get the ball to Hugh Jones quite regularly, then it could cause a problem for England, as well as also having the support of the two wingers that they have, Van der Merwe and Darcy Graham. Now, it's looking like Darcy Graham could possibly play. I would be shocked if he does. He went to hospital last weekend, but there's a lot of rumourings in the news that he could be playing. But I think this is, like, he's such a good player, and I think the selections that you have after him is such a drop-off in talent that it's such a huge call to have Darcy Graham in this team or not. Darcy Graham could be part of the British and Irish Lions this year. He's an excellent winger. He's a fantastic talent, massively underrated. Jesus, another addendum. Sorry, I hope this is the last one. But so I've now just looked at the team. Darcy Graham is not involved in the squad. Carl Rowe is actually starting at wing instead. And I'd like to retract some of what I said in terms of a drop-off in talent. Yes, Carl Rowe is not as good as Darcy Graham, but Carl Rowe is actually a very, very good winger. Watch him play for Glasgow during the URC and in the European Championship this year. And he's a solid replacement, like, really good. I don't think they're actually... I think they're actually probably pretty dangerous with him at that wing position, but we'll see when we watch on Saturday. And then you look at fullback for Blair Kinghorn. Played excellently for Toulouse, but I think he's had 2 off games for Scotland in the first 2 games of the Six Nations. When I say off games, you're probably thinking, no, I've been watching and Blair Kinghorn's been pretty good. That's fair. He hasn't been bad, you know, but if you watch him when he's playing for Toulouse, he's been on like another level. There was much of last year he was keeping Thomas Ramos out of that 15 shirt. He was starting in front of the French 15 in Toulouse. He was playing that well. So I think he's had a bit of a drop-off of form playing for Scotland. He hasn't been 100% himself, so they'll be looking to come back to form. I'm really kind of going through the selections. It kind of just encompasses the whole story between these two teams. Both of them are just trying to get a win. Scotland to just get some momentum back into their own team, and England to build on what they did last week, well, not last week, 2 weeks ago, to just kind of push themselves forward and actually put a stamp forward to say, hey, we're one of the best teams in the world as well. So, huge game. Can't wait for it, and I'll see you at the review. See ya.